In a time when staying silent became the easy path, one man chose to speak the truth. It was the year 2025. Gaza was under fire. War filled the air. Missiles struck schools, hospitals, and homes. Children were dying. Mothers held their lifeless bodies, frozen in grief. The world looked on quietly. Leaders gave their usual lines, deep concern, calls for peace, while they met behind closed doors, smiled for the press, and signed billion-dollar arms deals. No one seemed ready to speak out against the injustice, until one voice rose. Ibrahim Traoré, the young president of Burkina Faso, had no jets or oil reserves. He didn't lead a global power, but he had something even more powerful, a voice not ruled by fear, and a conscience not controlled by politics. On a cold morning facing the international press, Traoré stood tall. His face showed calm, but his eyes held fire. As cameras recorded and microphones reached out, he didn't speak like a politician. He spoke like a human being. The blood of innocent children, he began with clarity, is not a game for politics. If we let this happen, we fail as humans. The room fell silent. He didn't just condemn war. He called out Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by name for the Gaza bombings that killed civilians. He didn't use vague language. He was precise, passionate, and bold. The world hadn't seen anything like it. While powerful leaders stayed silent, afraid to upset alliances or risk trade, Ibrahim Traoré, a 37-year-old leader from West Africa, refused to stay quiet. His words echoed far beyond his region. They spread through the Middle East, Europe, and online, reaching millions. Social media lit up instantly. The world began to listen. Clips of Traoré's speech quickly went viral. People shared it across platforms, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. It wasn't just Muslims or Arabs reacting. Christians, Jews, atheists, all types of people, commented with the same thought. This is what real leadership looks like. In a time when world leaders often hide behind empty words, Ibrahim Traoré spoke with clarity. He didn't use a diplomat's script. He didn't stop for applause. He didn't ask for recognition. He spoke because it was necessary, because staying silent as children died was no longer acceptable. Don't talk to me about diplomacy, he said in a second speech. Don't explain alliances to me. Tell that to a mother crying over her dead son. Tell that to a child trying to sleep beneath broken ceilings. He didn't hold back. If your politics requires ignoring this pain, then your politics is already dead. People across the globe were stunned. Who was this man? Where did he find such courage? He had no massive army, no nuclear force, no seat at global summits. But what he did have was truth, and truth doesn't need weapons. It only needs a voice. Traoré wasn't just speaking for Burkina Faso. He spoke for every child in Gaza who had no voice, for every parent holding an injured child in smoke-filled streets, for every forgotten person whose pain had become just another headline. He became a symbol, not of war, but of conscience. Within days, social media buzzed with hashtags like Ibrahim Traoré Speaks, Africa for Gaza, and Voice of the Voiceless. Young people organized rallies. Artists painted murals of him beside doves and olive branches. From Accra to Algiers, Nairobi to New York, people were paying attention. Even in Gaza, his words reached those in pain. A Palestinian teacher, crying through a video, said, "In a world full of silence, you spoke. You gave us dignity when the world gave us nothing." But it wasn't just emotion his words stirred. It was awareness. Traoré's speech sparked new conversations in African politics. People began questioning why their governments remained quiet while powerful nations waged violent wars. Inspired by his honesty, some African leaders started reassessing arms deals and foreign ties. University students held forums. Protesters carried signs that read, "Our leaders serve outsiders. Traoré serves the people." In just a few days, the narrative changed. A question rang out across nations. Why did it take a small West African country to remind the world of its conscience? But Traoré didn't take this as a personal win. He didn't seek praise or headlines. When asked if he feared sanctions or consequences, he simply said, If standing up for innocent lives costs me my position, my reputation, or even my life, so be it. I would rather lose power than lose my soul. People heard him. The world was listening, but not everyone welcomed his voice. His message disrupted the status quo. In the quiet corners of powerful governments, whispers started. Who is this young man? Why is everyone talking about Burkina Faso? He's upsetting the balance. This cannot be ignored. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reacted quickly. He went on national TV with his familiar serious tone. He dismissed Traoré's speech as emotional propaganda and called it a distraction from the real threat of terrorism. He said Traoré should focus on fixing problems in his own country instead of criticizing others. His message was clear. Stay quiet, stay in your place. But Traoré refused. Just 2 days later, he held another press conference, this time with African flags behind him. Calm and confident, he stared into the cameras and said, "They want silence because I come from a poor country. They think we have no right to speak. But having weapons doesn't make you right, and being poor doesn't make you wrong." He went on, "We don't have your drones, we don't control your media, but we still have our hearts. And in our hearts, we carry the pain of those who suffer." That moment became unforgettable. Traoré wasn't just pushing back against Netanyahu. He was challenging a global system, one that lets powerful nations act freely while silencing smaller voices. And now, he wasn't standing alone. His words sparked political waves across Africa. South Africa, students marched outside the Israeli embassy. In Kenya, lawmakers discussed ending deals with Israeli surveillance companies. In Nigeria, both Muslim and Christian leaders released a joint statement. They praised Traoré's courage and called on their government to take a moral stand. In Algeria and Tunisia, crowds filled the streets holding candles and posters that read, "Africa will not be silent." In Europe, change began too. Youth activists started questioning their own leaders for ignoring the violence in Gaza. On TikTok and YouTube, videos spread showing Traoré's speech alongside heartbreaking images: damaged hospitals, wounded children, flattened homes. The silence of the West started to crack. But behind closed doors, efforts were already underway to stop him. Some diplomats leaked rumors. Foreign newspapers printed stories questioning Traoré's motives. Western think tanks labeled him a radical populist, warning he could harm global diplomacy. Still, Traoré stood firm. Speaking to the African Union in a moving speech, he declared, "If standing for peace makes me radical, I accept it. If supporting the innocent makes me unpopular, I welcome it. But I refuse to be another leader who stays quiet while children die." His words earned applause, but they also had consequences. Western aid to Burkina Faso was quietly reviewed. Major media outlets reduced coverage of his speeches. Still, something had shifted. People were no longer silent. They had found their voice, and they didn't need permission to use it. In Gaza, people began printing Traoré's face on posters and hanging them on shattered walls. In refugee camps, children sang his name. He was no longer just a politician. He had become a symbol, not of war or violence, but of truth, not of rebellion, but of moral resistance. Even in Israel, some human rights organizations started referencing Traoré in their protests. They didn't agree with all of his words, but they respected one thing: he cared. He spoke up. He refused to look away. Traoré had done something few thought possible. He had changed the discussion. Governments were now under pressure to reflect, journalists were pushed to ask real questions, and young people began to believe that courage didn't require power. It only needed honesty and heart. Change doesn't begin with armies. It starts with truth. In the days after Traoré's speeches, the world saw something rare, a ripple effect of genuine leadership. Not the kind built on wealth or fear, but one shaped by values, conviction, and compassion. Suddenly, Africa, continent often seen as powerless in global affairs, was setting the moral tone for the world. And at the center of it all stood Burkina Faso, a small landlocked nation with limited resources but unmatched bravery. Inspired by Traoré, African countries began taking action. Mali stopped negotiations with Israeli defense companies. Algeria pushed for a continent-wide humanitarian effort for Gaza. Senegal held a national day of prayer, where mosque and church leaders stood side by side, while most world leaders avoided the subject. Traoré kept moving forward. He visited summits, met with young people, spoke in parliaments. But his message never changed. Africa may not control the world's money, but we have what truly matters: the will to do what's right. At a youth summit in Ghana, a young girl asked him, "Aren't you afraid?" He paused and said, "Yes, but fear is the price of truth. I'd rather live one day in truth than a lifetime in fear." That moment went viral. Millions watched, millions shared, and millions felt moved, and the ripple stretched far beyond Africa. Across Europe, university students organized protests. Thousands marched with signs saying, "We stand with the innocent." And Traoré gave us our voice back. In Latin America, several leaders began quoting him in speeches, pointing to his honesty as an example the world should follow. In parts of Asia, new talks began on peace building, protecting civilians, and international accountability. But the most powerful reaction came from Gaza itself. Though still suffering under bombs and surrounded by hunger and fear, hope reached them through the words of a man far away. Unlike many, he had not forgotten them. He had spoken when it mattered most. In refugee camps, children painted murals of Traoré. One boy, no older than 9, held a sign that read, "You spoke, we heard, we are not alone." It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about dignity, memory, and human connection. Even inside Israel, the silence began to crack. A small but growing number of activists started quoting Traoré's words in their own campaigns. "If someone from Burkina Faso can see what's wrong," one Israeli protester said, "then what excuse do we have?" Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré kept working, not as a hero, but as a servant of the people. He reminded them, "This isn't about me. It's about the kind of world we leave behind. Will our children grow up in silence, or will we teach them to speak up for what's right, even when it costs us?" That became his legacy. The story of Ibrahim Traoré standing against Netanyahu was no longer about just 2 men. It became a defining chapter in modern history, a moment when one voice sparked thousands, and silence was no longer an option. A new dawn had arrived, not just for Africa, but for every place where truth had long been silenced by fear. Ibrahim Traoré showed the world that real change doesn't come from weapons or wealth. It starts with the courage to speak. His voice pushed governments to reflect, shook global media, and inspired a generation to believe that leadership comes from standing firm in truth. He didn't do it with force. He did it with words, with purpose, with heart. While the world often looks to the most powerful nations for guidance this time, a message came from a country many had overlooked. Burkina Faso, through its leader, had become a moral compass. Africa, too long left out of major decisions, reminded the world of something essential. Justice begins with humanity. And Traoré didn't stop. He continued traveling, speaking, and listening. He met students, faith leaders, and activists. No matter where he went, he repeated his core belief: even if we are poor in resources, we are rich in spirit. That spirit gives us the strength to stand for what's right. In the end, it was never about fame. It was about a choice between silence and truth. Traoré chose truth, and because of that, he became more than a president. He became a symbol, a reminder that one voice can carry the hopes of millions. Outro for YouTube narration, powerful and emotional. In an age of silence, one man chose to speak. In a time of fear, one heart chose courage. And in a world built on power, one soul chose people. Ibrahim Traoré didn't change the world with weapons. He changed it with truth, with compassion, with strength. He showed us that leadership isn't about age or money, but about knowing what's right and daring to say it. So now, it's your turn. Share his message. Be the voice that speaks when others stay silent.